This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Adam Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic preamp into the Empirical Labs EL8X distressor mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Adam Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show, and we really appreciate it. Now, get ready to rock.
Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown heard that we were doing this party, and they were like, this sounds so cool. We have to do it. Super cool band. Tyler is probably one of the nicest people I've ever met, like just so talented and very nice. We did this just a straight up recording. I think it was two or three guitars, bass, drums, and they killed it. And it was a party of like 200 people.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. No matter what style of music you create, Native Instruments provides you all the instruments you need, from drums, loops, and beats to vintage and modern synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I really enjoy recording real bands in my studio, but then adding amazing overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, or Hybrid keys. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get complete start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Are you struggling to make your mixes sound professional? If your tracks feel weak, distant, or lack punch and clarity, I've got the perfect solution. My free course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will teach you how to achieve pro-level mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. But these techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you use Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or another. If you're ready to make your best record ever, go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now for free. Find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Bobbi Giel, a mastering engineer based out of Nashville, Tennessee. She made the move to Nashville in October 2017 and spent 4 years at Georgetown Masters under the direction of Chief Mastering Engineer Andrew Mendelson, whom I still need to have on the podcast. Andrew on. I have worked with him, though, in the past. Before joining the team at Welcome to 1979. Bobbi began her career at University of Hartford's the Hartt School, where she earned a Bachelor of Music degree in Music Production and Technology with a concentration in classical piano and a minor in business administration. Following graduation in 2015, she spent 2 years working at various recording and post-production studios in New York City, including MSR Studios, now Sound on Sound Studios in Montclair, New Jersey, the New Atlantic Studios at Atlantic Records, and LVLY Studios. I assume that's Lovely Studios.
Lively.
Yes. Oops. All right.
No, it's good.
Close.
It could go either way.
In addition to mastering, Bobbi is a member of the Audio Engineering Society and a member of the Producer and Engineers Wing of the Recording Academy. In 2016, she was also featured on Humans of New York, a popular photo blog and book of street portraits and interviews collected on the streets of New York City. That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you to Chris and Yoli Mara for the introduction over at Welcome to 1979. Thanks, guys. Please welcome Bobbi Giel to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bobbi, are you ready to rock?
I'm ready to rock.
Welcome to the studio. So, first of all, thank you for braving midday traffic, to make it across town to get here. Nashville's getting a little more like LA every day, isn't it?
Yeah, it's off, especially if you're going from west to east or east to west. It's just, yeah, it's not fun, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so Welcome to 1979 is where your mastering studio is now. Is it in the usual spot downstairs off the kitchen area and all that, where the lathe is?
Yep. So we master for digital and vinyl in that same room. Our VMS 70 lathe is in there, kind of our little bunker.
Is that a lathe that has stayed with the studio, or is that one that is yours that you moved into the studio?
Oh, that stays with the studio. I think Chris Mara bought it 11 years ago. And it's seen me, it's seen Maggie Luther, who trained me on it, a few other engineers too. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool stuff. Well, so tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, you've done quite a variety of things. What got you, I mean, you know, obviously being interested in music seems like that was your beginning.
Yeah.
But then tell us a little bit about that, and then going into this pivot into like, mastering sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. So I grew up just as a musician in general. Like I grew up playing piano, violin, guitar. I was in marching band as a kid in high school. And so I always kind of knew I wanted to do music as my career. But when I was looking at college programs, because I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know if I wanted to do education, or I didn't think much of myself as a composer or a performer. I get very bad performance anxiety. So then there was a class I took in high school. It was a basic sound recording 101 class. We spent the whole semester doing a cover of Seven Nation Army.
Nice.
And I forgot what I played on it, but I really liked the creative process of it. And I thought this was something that I could do. And then when I realized that there were college programs that, you know, emphasized in it, that's what I decided I wanted to do. But most college programs don't cover mastering. It's not something that's really taught in school. So when it was time for me to get an internship, a friend of mine was actually down in Nashville already. Adam Grover, he actually is at Sterling Sound now as a mastering engineer. Yeah. And so he was at Georgetown.
Is Adam cutting vinyl over there?
No. So it's Joe, right? Yeah, Joe and Ryan Smith.
Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah.
Yep. Ryan's been on the show.
Yeah, I love Ryan. Adam does he does the Atmos stuff for Sterling.
Right.
Yeah, he's one of the I think there's 2 engineers there that do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's amazing. But he was already at Georgetown. He was an assistant there. And so I called him and I was like, "Are you guys looking for an intern? Like, you know, I just need an internship and I don't know anything about mastering." And he said, "Yeah, come on down." So I did, and I just kind of fell in love with it, and I really liked it. And then when I graduated, I was trying to get into mastering, but there weren't a lot of, you know, opportunities I was finding.
Yeah, I imagine that's a tricky one on the one hand, because, you know, like what, well, it kind of makes me wonder, like, are mastering studios more inclined to have a traditional studio path with interns that work their way up and become house engineers than multi-track recording studio? Is there a difference there between the two?
It can go either way. I mean, I took the route of I was an intern and then I became an engineer and then head engineer at 79. But I also think people go into mastering after working in studios for so long. So you can go that route too. It's just harder with mastering to have a dedicated large staff like a recording multi-tracking studio would.
Yeah.
You know, and interns and all that. So I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah,
in a multi-track studio, you've got more people coming and going from the studio, so you might need more
hands on deck.
More hands on deck. Yeah. But like the role of house engineer seems to have sort of vanished into independent stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Where it's like you bring your own producer and engineer, but maybe you just have a house assistant who's really might just be engineering too, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's how a lot of studios work now. It's more, you know, the artist will bring in their own engineer, or they'll book the studio and then the studio will hire an engineer that has worked there before.
Yeah.
There's not the typical house engineer structure as often anymore.
Have you ever heard of a mastering studio where somebody comes in with their own mastering engineer?
No. And I have a funny story about that. So I was working on a project a couple years ago. And there's a communication issue between deadlines. And I had to go to AES for, I was doing the student competition. I was
in New York.
Yeah. So I was judging one of those. So I was, getting ready to go there. And when I got there, I got a call saying that, we really need these masters by Friday. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday at this point. And I didn't bring any of my travel gear, which was my first mistake. And so,
is that something that you would do now? You would travel with the ability to do stuff?
Yeah, like I'll travel with a set of headphones and my laptop and like a little portable interface kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was, and there was no one at 79 who could finish up the project for me because we were all at AES. So fortunately, a friend of mine, Oscar Zambrano, who's a mastering engineer in New York, just said I could use his room, which is a great sounding room, but it's very disorienting when you're in a whole new environment trying to master something that you don't know the room. And he also uses Sequoia, which is a PC-based DAW, and we use Wavelab, which is Mac-based. So I was like very disoriented. So yeah, I wouldn't say that mastering engineers can kind of pop into studios, but I mean, I don't see why they couldn't. They would just have to be familiar with it beforehand.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think of the roaming engineer from studio to studio, and historically, an engineer might even bring in their own monitors into the studio.
Yep.
I wonder if that's changed too, almost on the assumption that a project, an outside engineer might come into a place just because they're just going to track something, but they might be taking it back to their own studio where they're familiar with speakers too. It's just interesting. I never really thought about that. Like,
I haven't
the
either.
idea of the mastering engineer, is usually it's a mastering engineer is matched to the room.
Yep.
Whereas the other kind of studio, it's like people are coming and going.
Yeah. I haven't actually never thought about that either. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, recently we were chatting also with Stephen Lee Tracy, and actually it was before that I'm thinking of Dan Millis. Sorry, Dan was talking about traveling with a laptop for some mastering stuff and bringing a pair of headphones that he really knew. Have you found that headphones can be super useful for you? You can really like be anywhere and know exactly what you're hearing?
Yeah, obviously it depends on the environment. I mean, if I'm on a plane or something like that, it doesn't matter. But yeah, especially for quality control purposes, having a set of headphones that I'm really comfortable with is super helpful because if I have to do any quality control on masters outside of my mastering room, I know those headphones well. So even if I'm in a different environment and the outside is not quite the same, I can pretty much still do what I need to do on headphones.
When you say quality control, is that like a specific part of the mastering process?
Yeah, it's the very last step before you send out the deliverables. So usually you listen down to the entire program in whatever format that you're delivering it in. So if it's high resolution WAV files, DDP for a CD production, vinyl, if you're doing vinyl cutting masters, you would listen down to those too. Because we're the last set of ears that listen to something. Right. So it's good. That's probably the most important part of the process. So.
That's a part of the process where you're not needing to necessarily make changes to it, but you just need a way to be able to listen critically for pops and clicks and errors or something like cutting off funny or anything like that, right? Yeah,
like, if a track was cut off by accident, or if there's audio dropouts, clicks, pops, really bad distortion even. But I mean, a lot of music has distortion. It's more if it's, intentional or if it's an error on the exporting end. But yeah, that's basically what it is. It's not, the goal is to not go back and make changes when you do the quality control. It's just making sure everything's fine before you deliver it.
Like you already made decisions to get it right. Now you're just checking that what the computer spit out and you're about to send off actually did the things you thought it was going to do, right?
Yep. And sometimes it doesn't.
Are there things that you've noticed are hearable on speakers versus headphones, or more hearable on headphones versus speakers?
I would say clicks and pops are definitely more noticeable on speaker or on headphones. Distortion, depending on what kind of distortion, like if it's low end distortion, it's more noticeable on speakers than on headphones. If it's high frequency distortion, if you play it on a lower volume on speakers, it's more noticeable. But yeah, it's like sometimes I won't hear distortion until I listen on headphones, but it's more because I'm just so focused on the sonic quality of what I'm listening to that the distortion comes as an afterthought. So then when I put my headphones on, I'm like, oh crap, there's distortion. But if it's tasteful, if it, brings something to the master, I'm not going to get rid of it. It's really just if it's a distraction or if it just really impedes it.
Speaking of distractions, would headphones or speakers be more likely to reveal Doobie the barking dog next door during the podcast?
He's going. His lungs are going.
Well, once again, rock stars, we won't know if you'll hear this or not because my mixing skills are extremely good. So we'll see if you even notice that there's a dog barking anywhere. If you do, drop a comment in and let us know. That'd be awesome.
I'm interested.
Well, very cool. So talk a little bit about your studio. Tell us about your studio setup now at Welcome to 1979. And you could do it in the other order too if you want. If you want to talk about some of the stuff that you really learned about mastering before you got to Welcome to 1979, anybody that really inspired you as a teacher, mentor, or just a place to work, and that kind of story, that'd be great.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so I've learned a lot from a bunch of different engineers. I think before I started 79, one of my biggest influences was Ebony Smith. I don't know if you've had her on the podcast yet.
No, not yet, no.
Yeah, she's an incredible engineer and producer, and just like the way she speaks and the way she conveys things is just, I love her for it. And I actually met her through the Humans of New York thing I was on. She worked for Atlantic Records at the time and saw my post and reached out and was like, come on by, I'd love to meet you. So I got to meet her, and to this day we still work on projects together.
And her name is Ebony Smith?
Ebony Smith.
Ebony
Smith.
Okay,
yeah. She's based in New York, but she travels, everywhere.
Hi, Ebony. We'll have you on the show.
Yeah,
soon,
she needs to come
hopefully.
on. She's great. But she was a really, she still is a mentor to me. But definitely when I lived in New York, because I was still kind of getting my footing. I was 22. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just trying to
talk about that too. I'm sure you hear this question often, but like, what's it like to be a woman getting your feet planted firmly in the music biz? If you want to, you don't have to talk about it either.
Oh no, I'm fine.
But if you have anything you want to say about that, you're welcome to talk about the experience. New York's hard enough already. Getting in the audio business is hard enough. Is that even a fair question to say what's it like to be, a woman as a mastering engineer getting started?
Yeah, obviously there's the more overt obstacles that people talk about. But I would say I'm actually luckier in a lot of ways because I came up in the later 2000s, and 2015, 2016 is when I started kind of getting my feet wet in it. And women that were working in the 70s and 80s and 90s definitely had it much harder and went through a lot more. And I think they made it a lot easier for us. Obviously, there's still a lot of discrepancies and things aren't as equal as they could be. But New York was, it was a challenge, but I think also I was really lucky to find a place with Atlantic doing freelance work for them. And then even at MSR, I was the only woman, engineer there at the time. I was a general assistant, but the group of guys I worked with were just amazing. And they were so encouraging and supportive. And I didn't feel uncomfortable as a woman there. I could express what I wanted to express. I could do what I wanted to do. And I mean, to this day, I mean, we're still friends and we all go to each other's weddings and,
Nice.
So it's.
Well, how many weddings are you guys all having?
No. I think we're at 3 now. I think we've gone to 3. I don't know. But I lucked out. And I know that there's a lot of other women and individuals in general that don't have that same experience.
Right. Adam Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin by unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White A4V and A7V, available for a limited time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Do you think that mastering offers a different experience just in the room than tracking or production or working directly with the band? Do you think that means that it's a different group of people in the space when you're working, and that makes any difference?
I think with mastering, we're more closed off. Like, we are interacting with the clients, but it's more over the phone or via email as opposed to in person.
Like you talked about Ebony Smith being a inspiration mentor. So does that, so you're more likely to be working directly with somebody who you're learning from without, 10 other people distracting you in the control room, throwing a party at the same time. Or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, she's primarily a recording and mix engineer, but the sessions I'd work on with her were more songwriting sessions. So you were really only working with 1 or 2 other people. So it was still very close-knit. So I was able to learn from her in that respect. But yeah, I think, and even when I was at MSR, it was, we were working with Broadway casts and hip hop artists and all that.
I've never worked with a Broadway cast, but I mean, that's got to be a big group of people.
Yeah, it's chaos in the best way, I'd say. Like, I remember we did when they revived Fiddle on the Roof, we did that cast recording, and it was just like 2 days, because they can only do, I think, Sunday evenings and Mondays because it's the show schedule.
Right.
And I just remember it being like just all hands on deck. Just you had the orchestra in one live room, you had the vocalists in another one, and then the soloists in different ISO booths. It was wild, but it was a lot of fun.
And then you'd also have a chorus group singing on some of the stuff?
Yeah, so there were 3 live rooms at MSR, and so the biggest one had the orchestra, and then the second largest had the choir. And then all the ISO booths had different soloists, whether it was an instrumental soloist or a vocalist.
Any fun takeaways on how you mic up a session like that? Was that something you got a chance to do?
Yeah, so we would go in, the general assistants would go in the night before to set them up. And I mean, they were like 5-6 hour setups, maybe longer, depending on how much instrumentation there was. But it was really interesting. I mean, we did this other one called Bright Star, Steve Martin's musical with the...
Right on.
Yeah, it was awesome. But there was this big transition where they wanted everyone had to be in the live room. So we didn't split anybody up. But then we had to change everything over within like 15 minutes. So we took out like the grand piano. We took out all the instruments so all the vocalists could go in, and they're like doing a rough mix of all the stuff in the control room. And it was just... It was just a testament to like how well people knew what they were doing.
Right. It's fun to work on projects where everything is really well, fast, but well paced.
Exactly.
Like it's really organized and it's really intentional and well thought out.
Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely something that I took away a lot from that session, because I was like, okay, this is fast paced. This is high stakes, but no one's stressed out. No one's chewing each other out. No one's, picking on people or being negative. It's like...
Right, because everybody knew what to expect. Everybody knew it was going to be fast paced.
Yeah, everyone knew and everyone was prepared for it and everyone knew what they were doing. So I take that a lot with what I'm doing. It's like I want to walk into things and just be prepared and, not lose my cool on anything.
Yeah. Or everything, right?
Or everything, anything, or everything.
Everything. Yeah, it's like I think of it like a really well organized film shoot. When if you go from doing records, I remember, we do records in the studio. We might have a budget. Boy, they were a lot bigger back then than they are today.
Yeah, I know.
But we would, we'd hear about like let's say you had a budget of $150,000, which is just like sounds like an enormous amount to make a record with.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd hear about but the video shoot for the single, they spent $250,000 on that one video. And they did it in like a couple of days or something like that.
I know.
Probably some more editing. And you'd think about that and you'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And then you'd realize as you learn more, you're like, oh, but there's like a lot of people really well coordinated to pull this thing off really efficiently in that amount of time too.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are really well coordinated and they're also really good pre-planners. Like things are pre-planned weeks, months in advance. And when you get to that day, because you only have X amount of hours in a day to do something. So
how come we don't have production assistants like film producers?
I don't know. And that would be so helpful. That would be so nice. We just have assistant assistants, maybe, if we're lucky, right? Yeah, if we're lucky.
Okay, cool. So that sounds like some cool experiences on your time in New York and everything. What about we don't have to stay stuck on it too much, but do you remember any mic choices for vocals and things like that really were interesting to you?
We had, they definitely used the U87s. That was the popular choice. I think on some choir sessions we had RCAs, like the old RCA mics. The ribbons.
Yeah, I wonder if that was also to set a contrast between the soloist.
I think it was a little bit of, I think it was a little bit of both. But I distinctly remember setting those up because I was terrified I was going to drop the boom stand or something. Like, it was terrifying, but we were good. I can believe it.
And those boom stands are huge.
They're massive. But yeah, I think those were two of the big ones. I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
What about the orchestral stuff? Do you remember if you guys got into special mic arrays like decatrees and things like that, or was it more like room mics and spot mics?
It was more room mics and spot mics. We didn't do any decatrees. There were a few bloom line setups. I forgot on which instrumentation, but I want to say it was if there was like an upright bass or something. There was some of that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think I saw it on that.
So Rockstar's bloom line is when you take two figure-8 microphones and there's like a XY pair, but with figure eights, right? So
yeah, and they're kind of like, you can't see this motion, but they're on top of each other. Yeah.
Bobby's doing a motion.
Yeah, you can't see it, but
motion going on here at the studio. Welcome to the studio, by the way. We're still trying to name it, so drop in a name recommendation, Rockstars, but a couple of running right now. One is Pod Damn It.
Pod Damn It. That
was fun.
I feel like there might need to be like a nod to East Nashville, maybe.
Ooh, you got anything coming to mind? I'm putting you on the spot there. Podzilla. That's another one.
I like Pod Damn It better, I think.
I like that one too, because it's a call to action.
Yeah, I like that one.
And plus, it's like Pod Damn It Gumby. There's that too. A little old school reference. All right, so tell us about what you're set up in your studio at Welcome to 1979.
Yeah, so it's a small room, but we have our VMS 70 lathe, Neumann lathe.
That's a 1970s lathe, right?
1973.
Right? Okay, cool.
Yep. So we have that. We also have a Studer deck, which is basically if we want to cut directly from tape, the Studer is the original way you would do it. So we have that tape machine in our room. We also have an MCI that Mara Machine's restored for us. So we have that in there too. Yeah. If we want to like print a master to tape or print mixes before we master.
Is it kind of nice working in a place where if something happens with the tape machine, you just pick up the phone and call the other room?
Yeah, we just got the we recently got the tape machine down there, and we were having an issue with the left repro, and Josh, our other cutting engineer, emailed and told him the issue, and Chris was like, "Well, luckily it's still under warranty." when it came from upstairs, so a little internal joke that I don't think anyone else would get. But
well, I mean, I had a couple of MCIs in my studio, and I know what it's like to have everything ready, and you go start up your session, and you hit the play button, and nothing happens.
Yep. Yeah, I think this was. He pressed play, and everything was going well, and then the left channel just kind of like dropped out, and there's no more left. But it was very gradual. Like you didn't hear it at first.
So Rockstars, Mara Machines. So Chris Mara has been rebuilding MCIs since I met him, pretty much. Yeah. And then he just launched a great company with Yoli to restore tape machines and make them wonderful again.
Yeah, I mean they look really nice too. Like they're just beautifully restored. And I learned about tape primarily at 79. I mean, I've worked with tape 1 or 2 times before then, but I really got a crash course once I worked there, and it just made me understand recording processes and mastering processes a lot better. It's
just occurred to me, but it's probably good that Chris didn't name it, making analog great again, because that would have added some confusion later.
Oh God, yes, that's actually really great. We need to tell him that.
He just heard it live on the podcast.
We need to tell him that. I don't know if he'd be happy about that.
I'm gonna call this maybe the studio's making podcasts great again. I don't know.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so you've got the lathe in there, the tape machines. It's funny. I was thinking about the dog barking next door, and it's not fair because when Cameron Henry was on the podcast years ago, and we did it from that same room, I remember one of the challenges was that there was a toilet that if it flushed, we would hear it on the pipes or something.
Yeah, we covered that because
awesome.
I just
you're like, can't do it.
I couldn't do it, so we got that insulated. You don't hear that anymore.
Great.
We've added a lot more treatment to that room, so it's quieter.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, we're in the house here, so I'm sure if somebody, flushed the toilet, I'd hear it on the podcast.
Probably. So. That's okay.
Anyway, back to where we were.
Yeah.
So you've got the lathe in there, you got tape machines. What are some of the other tools of mastering? What are the other things that you would have in a space like that to be able to do your job?
It's pretty similar to like a recording studio, just on a smaller scale. We have a mix of in the box and outboard gear. We have our massive passive, which I love, and we just also put in a tube core compressor, which is similar to a Vermu. It's kind of got similar features, and so we really like that. But what's also nice about being in a mastering or a recording studio is if I want to try a different type of compressor, I can just kind of grab something from upstairs, slot it in, kind of change it in and out if I want to, which is nice.
Would you be inclined to use an 1176 at a mastering session?
I don't think an 1176, although were you at the 15th anniversary party that we had last year?
I had to miss it, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, there were 15 1176s.
Oh, great.
So I didn't use any of them. They were all on the recording and mixing side, so I'm kind of glad that, but even through there, I got my fill of 1176. But yeah, we won't really use that. It's more
15 in series. That'd be something.
It was 15 in series. It was 15 for 15th anniversary, and then I guess like it came to Chris in a dream. It was like 7 + 6 + 1 + 1 is 15, right? Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the inspiration for it.
I love it.
I know. But yeah, so we don't really use an 1176, or I haven't used it on mastering. I really like the APIs. I've used those on mastering. We don't have one.
2500 or whatever.
Yeah. But then, in the box, I use, Fab Pro L2 is a great limiter to use, and isotope, everything is very helpful.
Let me rewind to compression for a sec. So choosing different compressors, is it typical for you to see the needles moving much for gain reduction if you're adding a compressor in mastering, or is it more like a tonal difference from compressor to compressor?
It's more tonal. I mean, if you do see the meters moving, it might be between 0.5 dB and a dB. It's not going to be anything drastic. It's more for the tonal elements that it brings. I mean, the tonality you're going to get through an API 2500 is going to be different than you would get through a Manley. So it's really just the taste, the sound you think that you want with that master.
And some have transformers and some don't. Yep. And so it adds a harmonic richness.
Yep. Yeah. Like some have the transformers, some have different, the way that they're wired and, the way the currents flow through them is, changes the way that it sounds. So
you mean like feed forward, feedback, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never really studied that closely to know what the real difference is, but I guess, a lot of the times you just have switches and you hit them and you see what it sounds like. Right?
Yeah, that's how I've done it. I mean, I haven't really, I've read up on a little bit of it, but it's mostly just press a button. Oh, okay, I hear the difference, or, read the manual.
Yeah, so talk about that. What is a process of auditioning a different compressor in a mastering setup? Do you need to, do you pause and go pull the cables out of the patch bay, repatch into something else, and then see what something sounds like? Or is it important to have a system where you can quickly switch from one thing to another and you sort of level match? Just talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, most mastering studios are going to have a way to quickly A/B. You're not going to find where you're patching different compressors in and out. You're going to be able to A/B it pretty quickly. I mean, that's what I do because we only have one compressor in our chain outboard gear wise. But I mean, internally, if I'm, doing something in the box, I'll have multiple compressors and I'll just, mute and solo A/B, level match it.
See which one sounds best to you.
Yeah. But level matching is probably the most important thing because if they're not level matched and you don't get that comparison quite as well. So
right. So maybe break that down a little more for the rock stars. They probably heard it before, but why is it important to level match?
Yeah. So the way something sounds when it's, I can't really get too scientific because I don't know the science of it, but the way something's going to sound quieter is not going to sound the same way when it's louder. That's why a lot of times, and I don't know if it's the same on recording studio side, but on mastering, you're pretty much going to master. You're going to have your monitoring output at the same level every time you master because you know how it's going to sound.
Right. You mean as far as, because we've heard that on the show too, mastering engineers will say, I've got 2 listening positions for the volume pot or something like that.
Yeah. So you rarely change it. So the way something sounds when it's louder could sound completely different when it's quieter. The tonality changes when something gets louder. Like I said earlier with distortion, some distortion you can't hear unless you turn the volume all the way down, like that high frequency distortion.
Right. In other words, you can hear the distortion when you're listening quietly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard Craig Alvin talked about having an easier time hearing distortion in a mix.
Yep.
If it was down at a really low level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's why it's important if you're A/Bing compressors, especially on the mastering side, to make sure things are level matched.
And what about also just the fact that we might be drawn to the one that's louder and think it sounds better just because it's a little bit louder?
Yeah, because that's the thing too. I mean, compressors will have different impacts. It might beef up the low end a little bit more. It might smooth over the high mids or the mid range. So if you listen to it at the same level, you'll get what it's going to bring to that mix at the same level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have one louder and one softer, of course the louder one's going to sound like it's better because it's louder and maybe is beefier in the low end and all that. But it might not necessarily help the mix as much as the other compressor, but you wouldn't know that if it wasn't level matched.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing with mastering, being aware of level matching things so you're truly judging whether something sounds better or not.
Mm-hmm.
That follows the assumption that at a listening stage, you would turn the volume up or down a little bit to set it where you want it. So therefore you want to make sure that where the consumer listens to it at, it actually does sound better. Yet, ironically, as a mastering engineer, you never touch your volume knob. So like if it is louder, it literally is actually going to end up going out louder in the final version too, right?
Yeah. And I mean, and that's also why we listen at different, like once we master it, we'll listen to it on headphones again. When we do any noise correction or noise removal stuff, we'll listen to it on headphones. I've gone back and fixed a master when I listened to it on headphones because I realized, there's like the high end's too thin or there's too much of it. So then I'll go back and tweak it.
You mean go back to analog again and come back into digital again, or just go back to the digital version? Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make sure every episode of this podcast sounds great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at iZotope.com. Maybe you should give us a little bit of the steps of mastering process too. So like initially you start with something, maybe it's tape or maybe, at Welcome to 1979, it might be a tape of the mix, right?
Yeah. So it could be a tape. But primarily it's usually a stereo file, high resolution.
Like a digital.
Digital high resolution stereo file wave. We'll load it into our DAW, and then I just like to have everything at 0. Just like, I don't like to have anything in when I start because I don't know if, an outboard compressor is going to help it or if I want to do everything in the box, or maybe I'll do a hybrid,
Right.
So that's what we usually start with. And then I'll turn it up. I'll put a compressor on it. If I find that I like, the Pro L2 or the iZotope maximizer or, our tube core compressor, I'll keep that on. And then another big thing about mastering too is gain staging, which is all part of the level. And so I'll turn everything up to the level that I think I want it at, but then I'll start minimizing the gain earlier in the chain. So I might drop the mix down a little bit or my output on my DAW. So that it's quieter there, but then I can bump my compressor more to give it more of the color that the compressor adds to it.
Later down the chain.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So that's like the biggest, that's probably the most important thing too, is gain staging when you're mastering, because where you add your gain will impact how it sounds.
Wow, so many things to think about.
Yeah.
So many little steps in the process. So let's say you start out with a digital file and you decide you like an analog compressor. Would it go out of the computer into some of the analog gear and then come back into the computer and just get recorded as a new file? Or would it sort of get put on as an insert followed by plugins again immediately? Or is that even a important question to ask?
No, I mean, it's a great question, because sometimes I'll go through an EQ in the box, come out, hit a compressor, go back in, and then add maybe a limiter on top. So I'll print it, and then I'll add a limiter and then print it again, or I'll add it as an insert and then print it with the limiter. Sometimes I don't. I just go back in, I print it, and that's the master. It just kind of changes depending on what my signal chain is.
Right. So in the same way that mixing, like we might have some fundamental things that we tend to do in mixing, but we might be changing up our mix template a little all the time.
Yeah.
Like you can change up your mastering chain and template and stuff like that too.
It's not, I mean, I'm not glued to like one specific chain. I mean, there are plugins and outboard gear that I gravitate towards more often than others, but I'm not like specifically glued to one specific chain.
Let's see. Do you want to talk about some of the things that you listen for when you're adding these different things in a chain? You know, like first of all, you know, when you're mastering a project, does it matter a lot that it's a collection of songs and you're trying to make the collection work together versus it's a single and you're trying to make decisions about what should happen to this song if it's a single?
Yeah, it's a different listening experience. Not very different, but there are differences. When I'm mastering for a single, if it's an artist that I haven't worked with before, I usually always ask for references, just things, you know, artists that they've been inspired by, or, you know, mixes or masters they were listening to during their process of making this mix, just so I can kind of get an idea of what direction they're going in.
Right. So you could have like a reference for the whole record or a reference for the single.
Yeah.
And then within the record, you've got references relative between the different songs, right?
Yeah. So that's the main thing with a full record too is, you know, I'll usually start out with 2 or 3 songs. I like to work in sequence just because that's the way the artist intended for it to be listened to. I know that a lot of people shuffle now, or they'll, you know, do skips and stuff like that, but I really like to do it in sequence. So I'll start with like the first 2 or 3 songs. I'll send those to them, to the client, have them check it out. If they like the direction the mastering is going in, then I kind of take that as like a template to master the rest of the album.
Right. Right. Same like doing a mix where you might send it off, make sure you're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And then they say, this is great. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Because in a perfect world, the mixes are all going to be like, not sonically, they're going to kind of be in the same realm. You know, they're not going to be varying in level and craziness, because you'll either have one person mixing the whole album, or, you know, they've kind of already matched the mixes, even if it's different mix engineers. So in theory, when you're mastering the whole album, it's going to be the settings are going to be pretty consistent with minor changes between the songs and minor level adjustments.
Yeah. Awesome. We were talking earlier about Ebony Smith. You had mentioned her.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we really got a chance to say what it was about her that it really inspired you, or, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I just, there's a lot of things. I think one of the biggest things that I took away from the time I worked with her was just the energy she gave off was very calming and relaxing, but also just so knowledgeable. I mean, she can have an in-depth conversation about pretty much anything with anyone, and is just very easygoing and just very in the moment. And I'm a little bit more type A, so I can't really do that a lot, but it was definitely something that I aspire to embody, is just that calmness and being able to just get along with everyone and have deep conversations. And even if it's not studio or recording related, just connecting with people like that was, and it's important in music to be able to do that. And so that was a big thing that I took away from my time working with her.
Right. And in that scenario, you guys were in a sort of like a traditional studio and working with clients. So production is happening, overdubs, tracking, all that kind of stuff? Or was it strictly mixing and mastering?
Yeah, it was more like demoing. So it was more songwriting, demoing, coming up with, you know, different instrumentation for it. We would spend a few days in the studio doing that. But
interacting with clients.
Yeah.
A lot, right.
And then she also is the president of, the founder of Gender Amplified, which is a nonprofit that just it promotes women and non-binary individuals, primarily producers, but engineers and songwriters and all that too. So I got to work with her a little bit on that as well. And just her wanting to, bring different people into the spotlight and, get them some recognition and everything like that. That was another really cool thing to be a part of.
Dig it. When I think about working with people in the studio, and you talk about, seeing somebody being sort of calm and chill, interacting with people, it's definitely one of those lessons I heard early on about like, what made so-and-so a great engineer was their ability to always be calm during a session when shit's hitting the fan.
Yeah.
they never lose it. They never seem stressed. It's like, we'll get it solved. We'll take care of it, And I feel like I've certainly seen that in like Nashville, some of the great Nashville engineers, so like keeping it mellow, keeping it chill.
Yeah.
And I mean, as you've probably experienced in these sort of high pressure creative environments where there's also money and time being spent, there's a lot of opportunity to get stressed out.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
It's always going wrong in a studio, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, is there ever a session where something doesn't go wrong?
No, there's always something that is going wrong. And I think it's just a testament to really good engineers who can also just be calm and take it one step at a time and just, troubleshoot around it, but just not put people down in the process or be, not get anybody else in the room stressed out with you.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good quality for engineers to have in general.
So another thing that comes to mind, I don't know why I'm thinking of all these comparisons between a multi-track and a mastering setup today, but I am. And it occurs to me in mastering, because you don't necessarily have, you might not have somebody in the room who's like, exposing their vulnerable side by doing a vocal and then getting frustrated and pissed off because it's not going right. Is it possible that in mastering, you're more likely to like pour your heart into something and the only interaction you get is at that final stage of listen? And then even then, like they may be just sending you notes through an email. And does that get frustrating? Like, do you ever feel like in a traditional studio, you get the eye contact and the face-to-face interaction, whereas in mastering, it could be a little bit more separated, where you're like trying to close that feedback loop more carefully?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that Ebony and I had talked about when I decided to move to Nashville and do mastering. That was something she brought up because she loves being in a room with people and bouncing ideas off of one another, whereas I'm content being in a room by myself working. So I think it's just a difference in personality and workflow. But then I also think just if you're as a mastering engineer, like if you're in a really good room and you're listening to the music, it can be a very emotional experience just listening on high quality speakers in your room alone.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's definitely been times when I've poured my heart into a master and then I send it and it's not quite what the client wants. And I mean, it's a little discouraging, but it's also like, okay, I'm getting some constructive criticism and that's good. And at the end of the day, I just want to make music that they're happy with and that people will be happy listening to.
I think of Welcome to 1979 as a great situation where you've got this combination of the studio environment and the mastering environment and the record pressing plant and people around and stuff. So it must be pretty cool to be around other people when you're working, and maybe there's a little bit more of an opportunity to interact with the full creative process, We'll later in this interview, we'll talk more about like live to disc and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
which
absolutely.
is gonna be exciting. But have you found that there are ways that you sort of try to interact with the clients when you're mastering? Like, do you try and make sure that you get them on the phone as opposed to email, or like, let's get out of text message, or any advice in that?
Yeah, I'm all for getting on a phone call. But sometimes it's hard for me specifically just because I also cut lacquer too during the day, and that gets very loud because I've got a vacuum going, and I can't stop the lacquer cut. Like,
right, so you can't interrupt what you're doing to take the phone call then.
Yeah, so it's just for ease of workflow, it's better for me for an email. But I'm always, I mean, if it's better for a client to talk on the phone, it takes more coordination. But I always try to have like a dialogue with them. And I mean, I send an intake form to clients just to tell me, sequence, album title, all this stuff. And I always have a section there with mastering notes, like, leave links to things you want me to check out. If you want it to sound warm, if you want it to have energy, if you want it to sound like Luke Combs, like, I always want them to have that dialogue. And then if they do come back with comments, a lot of times, clients they're really nice, and they feel bad being like, I'm so sorry, but can we try it this way? And I'm like, that's fine. I mean, this is your music. Like, I don't want you to be unhappy with something that you're paying for, So please, like, tell me what you want me to fix. And if I think it might not be a good idea, or maybe we can try something else, I'll tell you. But at the end of the day, I do like that back and forth.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM artists, TV and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need amazing sounds that instantly elevate our music to the desired style. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit, offering a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're into hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, dance beats, or orchestral arrangements, the Native Instruments Complete Bundle has it all. From drums, loops, and beats to synths, realistic strings, vintage bass, guitars, and keys, it's a comprehensive collection. I love recording real bands in my studio, but then enhancing the tracks with drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. It's a surefire way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Adam Audio is celebrating 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Adam Audio are unveiling a special limited edition series of monitors that will look stunning in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series. Available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself, the clean, glossy white finish exudes a luxurious feel and will stand out in any studio or home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V retain the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Adam Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as cool as your music sounds. Don't miss out on the limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at adamaudio.com. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Bobbi Giel. I said it right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Joining us here at Recording Studio Rockstars again. It's a very cool spelling. That's why I had to double check.
Yeah.
And it actually kind of reminds me of the Jay Geil band. That's probably why I would think about a different pronunciation too.
Probably. I think the hard G throws people off. The J. But yeah, just it's German. I think I've only had like one or two people get it right on the first try, but that's because they spoke German.
Right.
So, but it's fine.
You ready to jam?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Are you mastering for vinyl? You said, I think you already answered that question. So talk a little bit about that. What does that mean to run a lathe, and how is that different from mastering music in the computer? Or are they actually just different stages of a process?
They're essentially two separate masters. If you're mastering for, DSPs or CD or anything, I mean, you have unlimited bits and ones and zeros to work with. Whereas if you're working specifically with a vinyl master and you have a lathe, there's a finite amount of space you have on the record to be able to fit on the record. So there's more considerations you have to take in to account when you're doing a vinyl master. Primarily it's level, the magic word. It's level, compression, low end. Those all play a role in vinyl mastering, whether there's too much or too little. And so I will say that vinyl mastering, especially since I'm working with a lathe, has really given me a better understanding of how to use my tools. Because I mean, I was in college and from like 2011 to 2015, I mean, very much in a digital age, didn't have a lot of experience working with tape or anything like that. So I always worked in the digital realm. And so I didn't work with any considerations or restraints. But then going backwards and working with vinyl, I've learned how to use my tools in a very specific way that's helped me understand how to use them.
Like, do you feel like it helps you have a better understanding of what each one is actually doing?
Yeah, because I have to use it in a very specific way, which has just helped my mastering projects for other things, DSPs and all that stuff.
Yeah. So when you are mastering in the digital world, you're changing the sound, you're sort of sculpting the sound. But then when you have a collection of songs that are going to go on one side of a vinyl record, 12-inch record, how many songs was it? 5 or something is typical?
5 is typical, yeah. 5 or 6, depending on the song length.
Yeah. Then you have to have all these considerations like, and to be honest, we haven't talked about this. We have talked about this on the podcast, but I remember Cameron Henry from Welcome to 1979 talking about this too. And learning that you've got considerations like whether the song's on the outside of the record or the inside of the record, that changes the quality of the low end response and distortion and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So the closer you get to the center of a record, basically the less low end frequency response you're going to have. It's going to be more and less high frequency response. It's going to be mainly mid range. Primarily because the grooves have less room to work within. Right, and the grooves going left to right is the bass, right? Yeah. And so there's less room for them to work in. So the closer you get to the center of a record, the less frequency content you're going to have. But yeah, I'm losing my train of thought.
All right. I'll give you a drop a marker. Take your time.
You're
on the spot. You got to talk for 2 hours. So.
Yeah, no, I had a hiccup and I was like, trying not to do it.
No, you can just go, hold on a second. Drop an edit marker and then pause. That's
okay,
fine.
That was good. Okay, we're good now.
Yeah, so let's just a couple of reminders. So a needle moving in a groove in the record, it moves back and forth for the frequency, and then it moves sort of up and down for the sum and difference, like the side, in the same way that a mid-side microphone thing adds up and creates a stereo image. A record sort of does the same thing, right?
Pretty much, yeah. So if you ever have the opportunity to look at a groove, it's actually 3 lines. And so the left and right lines are your stereo imaging. It's your left and right. And then the middle is going to be your depth. So volume, low end, all that stuff. And then you can also have low end frequency content and high end frequency content in those outer lines as well. So yeah, it works when a needle is playing on a turntable. It's going to move side to side and up and down. Right. That's how it follows it.
Okay, cool. And then And the up and down part is one of the reasons why you have to be really careful with any low frequencies being out of phase on a record, right?
Yeah, because lower frequencies travel at a slower rate. So when they're physically cut onto a record, they can kind of, I'm making another motion that people can't see, but it looks kind of like a big snake kind of slithering through,
Right.
very wide. Whereas if it's a higher frequency, they'll kind of look like scribbles, like really tight ringlets or scribbles. But if there's low frequency content and it's out of phase, the left and right will literally invert on each other, and create one line, and then it's not playable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, or if there's phase issues and it's too loud, then the cutter head will actually jump out of the lacquer and
right, it'll just leap right out.
I've had that happen. And that just plays back as a pop or a skip on a record, right, if it were to be pressed.
Just pops out and goes into the next groove or something.
Yeah. So that's why you can't really overpower your lacquer cut with low end or volume, because that also takes up more space on a record. So if you have a longer side, say you have 20 minutes, it's going to be quieter with a little less low end than if you were to have a 16-minute side or an 18-minute side.
Right. So if you try and pack more, so a way to think about it, right, is that the more audio time, like longer songs, et cetera, we try and pack onto the side of a record.
Mm-hmm.
If we're thinking like, oh, can't we just let's put 12 songs in the record or something.
Yeah.
We're packing all those grooves like tighter and tighter. Like imagine winding a yarn in a circle and making a spiral. That's what the grooves are on a record, essentially, right? So if you tried to wind it so close, you'd be like, we can fit more yarn in there, but then you can't have the yarn wiggling around because they'd be bumping into itself. Yeah,
actually a good comparison that Chris actually told me once was, you can think of a marching band moving in a circle. You've got people on the inside and then people on the outside. The people on the outside are going to take larger steps to fill that space.
Right.
So that's your outer rim of a record. And then the people on the inside are going to take much smaller steps, and they also have less room to move within. And that's the inside of your record. So if you have more frequency content, more volume, more dynamics, it's not going to fit in that.
Right. So like the people diameter. Taking the big steps on the outside of the circle.
Yep.
Those are loud, bass heavy steps.
Yeah. Those are loud bass. I mean, that's why when vinyl was the primary way people listened, that's why you had your singles on your first two tracks on a record, and then your ballads were inward because it was less frequency content to play back and less volume. So it was easier for ballads to be in that inner diameter.
Right.
Nowadays, when there's different formats you can listen to, people sequence everything the same. So, they'll get a single as like the last track on a side, and it plays back. There's some playback distortion, or it's quieter and all that, and people wonder why. And that's
Are you aware of artists making decisions to sequence the record differently for vinyl?
Not nowadays, no. I did remaster a project, and I remastered a project specifically for vinyl, and they actually came in and heard their lead single as like the last track on the side, because that's how their digital album was sequenced, and they heard the distortion. And they're like, oh, no. So then they actually resequenced it for vinyl.
Cool.
But a lot of artists, I don't even think it's that they don't want to. I think they just don't know to do that.
Right. I mean, even we're just here asking these questions. And like, if you hadn't heard this stuff before, you'd be like, what? I didn't know all that.
Yeah. And I mean, by the time, projects get to the mastering stage, a lot of times the artists they finish their portion, like some will be involved in the mixing stage, but by the time it's mastering, it's really just getting how the music they want to release it, getting it into those formats. And so the idea of resequencing a project specifically for vinyl is not something that usually comes up.
Yeah. So a likely scenario is an artist makes a record. Let's say they go to Welcome to 1979. They cut a whole album.
Mm-hmm.
Then the mixes come down to you in the mastering room, and they either show up on tape and they get loaded in through analog gear, and now they're digital format for the final stage. Do they ever not go digital at all? And I mean, we're not going into the live to disc recording yet.
Yeah.
We'll get there in just a sec. But do you sometimes have sessions where it stays on analog tape, goes through the analog gear straight to the cutting lathe and never went digital?
Yeah, and that's why we have our Studer, because that was the original way you would cut directly from tape. So we don't do many of those sessions. I think maybe we'll do 2 or 3 of those a year.
How do you like those?
They're a fun challenge. And it's really awesome that I get to do them, because a lot of people don't nowadays. And I like them. It's a lot of fun.
How do they sound when it's never been digital?
You know, I know there's a lot of talk of like, what's better, digital or analog? I love the warmth of analog, and they sound very warm and full and that kind of glossy glued sound, but I don't necessarily think it's better than digital. I just think it's a very specific sound that sounds good with certain types of music. But I mean, I personally love how it sounds, and yeah, I'm always excited when we get those kind of sessions, when it's just tape, no computers, no digital processing, all just, you know.
I'm trying to think if I've ever done a record that has been tape all the way. We did a Fluid Ounces record. We were tape all the way to mix, but then I think we printed our mixes to DAT.
Oh, really?
At the end, and it was digital, at the end, and CD went to CD anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't think I've ever done a project where it was never went digital.
Yeah, we did one last year where it was, they recorded to tape, they mixed to tape. Then the tapes were EQ'd, gave to me, I mastered from tape. And then we cut straight to vinyl, and it was, I mean, that was probably my second time ever doing a session like that. So it's still like a learning process even while I'm doing it, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think I remember Steve Albini. I mean, I'm constantly name dropping him. Sorry, rock stars, but I mean, he did share a lot of cool stories when I worked with him.
I love that.
But I think he was saying the Breeders record, when he had done theirs, if I'm remembering that right, he specifically sought out mastering at Abbey Road because they had a lathe where the record, which had been analog, mixed analog, went to mastering for analog to disc, but they had a way to pull the digital off of the cutting head on the lathe so that they could make a CD copy of it, but but the vinyl never went digital. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we could also do that because, and that's, I mean, I know we're going to get into our direct to discs, but that's what we'll do. Like, we'll go directly to the lathe, but then we also are capturing what's cutting from the lathe. We're capturing it into our DAWs, kind of like a backup.
Right.
So we have that too in case something goes wrong.
Right. I described it as this like magic trick of it. It's like, well, you just split the signal,
You're not, I mean, there's a lot of places that aren't able to do that.
Yeah.
So, it's the fact that we can is a unique thing.
Yeah. What a cool idea. So we're so used to this idea more recently of like, the record was made all digital. Now we're going to make a vinyl copy of it. And then it's like, I hope it works.
Yep.
How cool to make a record that could be analog start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just, the digital's just like the afterthought.
Yeah.
But hopefully sounds really cool.
Yeah. And I mean, that was kind of what this project last year was. An artist from Europe, Daniel Kemish, came in, and he wanted everything recorded to tape, mixed to tape, cut straight to vinyl. And then the digital was an afterthought. It wasn't the primary way that he wanted people to listen. So I thought that was really cool, and just a lot of fun and just a different experience.
That one's not in the show notes in the discography yet?
I don't think it is, no.
Maybe if you think of it later and it's out,
I can
we'd
add
love
it.
to hear it. Yeah, it'd be really cool to go listen to that one too, be able to hear the digital version of one that stayed analog all the way up to that point. Yeah,
there's also another one, I think it's in the Spotify discography, Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown. We did that directed.
Here we go. We finally got there.
We got there. It's a good segue.
Yeah.
So that one was direct to disc, and then the digital that's on Spotify was is the capture off of that. I mean,
It's got such a great sound.
Yeah, but it's the capture off the lathe, essentially.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that session start to finish.
Yeah.
What happened? What was it? Was it one of the parties or the events, or was it just a session that was dedicated to doing this recording?
So it was our 15th anniversary party last year. The one with the 151176
is in there, right on.
Yeah, and we ended up getting Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown heard that we were doing this party, and they were like, this sounds so cool. We have to do it. Super cool band. Tyler's probably one of the nicest people I've ever met, like just so talented and very nice. And they came in and, we did this just a straight up recording. I think it was 2 or 3 guitars, bass, drums. I think that was it. It was 4-piece.
Sounds like a rock band.
Sounds like a straight up rock band. And they killed it. And it was a party of like 200 people, maybe more. It was very tight that day.
It was 199. I couldn't make it.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it was 199. Probably 200, but then people trickled in and out. But, and we before the party, we did a sound check, and usually in that case, and we do this for all direct to disc sessions because we want to get an idea of levels to cut at. Yeah. So I usually ask for them to do the song that's most dense, has the most, dynamics, loudest vocal, all that stuff, so I can kind of get a good cutting level set. So we did that. We did a couple songs, then we brought up the lacquer to play back in the control room so they could hear how it would sound. And I don't think we ended up doing any tweaks from that. I think maybe Chris made a couple of minor mix tweaks, but we didn't have to go back in and do another test run.
Is it something you set it up as kind of a static mix, or is it something where there's a lot of mix moves on the fly during the performance?
I think for the most part, we set it as a static mix. There might be some minor changes here and there, but essentially it's just static. And what they'll do is they'll take a stereo mix out of the console, and it goes directly into my my console, and then through my outboard gear, my console, and then through that into the lathe. So it doesn't hit the only time it hits any DAW or computer is when it's coming back out of the lathe into my DAW for
the digital version.
For the digital version, it basically as an archive.
So it must be a lot of fun to put the record back on and listen to it.
Yeah.
When it's done.
Yeah, it was really, and they were just a really tight band too. Because the other thing about direct to disc is it's live and you can't go back and fix things.
Right.
Like you can't
even stop once. We should be breaking this down even more.
Yeah, I know.
It's such a great thing. So when it's go time,
you can't stop.
You can't stop.
Mm-mm.
You can't even. It's even more live than a live stage.
Yeah, like
performance.
If we were to stop, I would have to stop my lathe, take off the lacquer, put another lacquer on, recalibrate the weight of my head and the groove width and everything, and then start from the top again. So it's very like once you start, you can't stop.
Right. So you're actually performing the 5 songs back to back.
Yep.
And the timing has to be exact or pretty close.
Pretty close. I mean, the timing, I think that record, each side was maybe 18 minutes, which was perfectly fine. The timing more so is for me, because I have to manually put in the banding, which is when you're looking at a record, it's that larger gap in between each track so you can visualize where each track is.
Right.
But I have to place that. So if I'm not paying attention, or like they do a false start or something and I accidentally press that somewhere, if they don't want me to have, if they're very intent, if they're content with me having that, I don't have to restart it. But if I put it in the wrong spot and they're not happy with it, we have to start over again.
Wow.
So
they start out, and do you have to put a band in the very beginning of it, or does it just start rolling? And
It just starts, yeah. So you just have your leading groove. It just starts rolling. It's really just the ones in between tracks, because then when the last track ends, you have your lead out groove.
So it starts going. They can and what happens? Do you wave at somebody and go like, start playing?
No. So we do it kind of like, we have a old rotary phone in our room.
Right.
And usually it's Josh or whoever. Josh is our other cutting engineer at 79, and he'll be on the phone, and he's talking to Chris and anyone who's assisting him upstairs, telling him as soon as I drop my cutter head and it's the lead-in groove's gone in and we're ready to cut, he goes needle down, and then Chris tells the band to play. And then at the end, the band knows that once they're done, they have to be very silent, because even when I'm cutting the lead out groove, that noise is going to be, if they make any noise or they're talking, it's going to be in there.
Right. I am really impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by analyzing the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You just adjust the settings to your taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can manipulate the level of the vocal, bass, and drums even at the mastering stage. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding, but now when I send off the masters for approval, they absolutely love the way our records sound thanks to iZotope. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Lite at iZotope.com. And they talked on it. It was at the end of one of the tracks, the guy goes like, "Man, it just sounds like everything just comes rushing in after the end."
Yeah.
And now that I'm hearing the story, I'm like, well, that's the sound of 151176 is what that must be.
It sure is. Yeah. And so then you lead out, and then once the lead out groove is locked in and the cutter head's up, then Josh on the line is like head up, or needle up. And then the band knows that they can, make
Needle
noise
up.
and
Needle up.
Needle up. Yep. And if it's the A side, and then we got to move to the B side, so they got to wait until I, prep the next lacquer. And,
right. So there's an actual breather right there.
Yeah. So they do like 4 or 5 songs. They can breathe for like 5-10 minutes.
Tune.
Yeah. Get tuned. If they want to, change pedals or any, anything they have going on, they can do that. And then, then we start side B and we do the same thing.
So you say, all right, everybody ready? And then you start the machine, and you drop the needle, and then you turn to Josh, and he's like on the phone, he's going, needle down.
Needle down. Yep.
And then Chris is upstairs at the console with the big MCI with the plasma meters dancing.
Pretty much, yeah. Like I'm like making sure that, my needle's not jumping and my breakers aren't going anywhere, and we're not getting any double grooves on the lacquer, which is essentially like when 2 grooves are on top of one another, because if that happens, it's not playable and gotta start over again.
Right.
So I'm making sure all that stuff's going on. But I know Chris upstairs too is making sure, none of the mics get knocked over, no one steps on a cable and it unplugs everything, and small things like that, especially if
so
there's
the way Welcome to 1979 is laid out, rock stars, you've got the control room upstairs, big room. You can have 60 people in the control room, or 60 people at the Welcome to 1979 recording summit?
It's 60
I think you
at
have
the summit.
20 or something or more in the control room at once. It's a big control room.
We definitely packed in way more than you can have at that party in that control room. Like it was packed.
So you can have a bunch of people up there.
Yeah.
Right, with the party, of course.
Yeah.
You got everybody there standing around with the beer in hand.
Uh-huh.
And then downstairs, where the old offices were, because this was originally a record pressing plant or a tape plant.
Yeah,
and
I think
now
it was
again.
Yeah, I think it was a record pressing plant, and then it was a tape plant, and now it's a recording studio, vinyl cutting
Right.
place.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in those offices, they've been converted into ISO booths. So the band is down there. So it's like, and the funny thing is you're actually closer to the band than Chris is.
Yeah. But I can't see them.
In your lathe room. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you communicate up to Chris. Chris is on the talk back.
Yep.
Hit it or something like that. And then the drummer hopefully was like ready and just 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
He's probably already got the tempo going in his head while he's waiting.
Probably. Yeah. Because that's the thing, like they've got cameras in the control room feeding down to the live rooms downstairs. So Chris can see them and, has a talkback mic and everything. I can't talk back to them and I also can't see them, but I can hear them.
But if something goes wrong in the control room, you guys just call up to Chris and it's just hold up.
Yeah, if something goes wrong downstairs, they also have a camera. I have a camera in my room that feeds to them as well, so they can see me. So if something goes wrong, I can kind of wave and be like, "Hey!" But luckily on that one, nothing went wrong.
That's cool.
Yeah,
and then the band rocks out. So that's just a cool setup, and it's cool to hear the sound of that session too, because you can hear Tyler's vocal mic picking up the strings on the guitar.
Yeah.
But you hear the amp sort of panned off to the side. So you can really hear him like working the guitar, which is a cool sound,
Yeah, no, it's super cool. And, you can definitely tell that it's a live record, but it's also, it was recorded in the studio. It's got that studio quality to it as well.
Yeah.
And it's all one take, imperfections embraced, and, not hitting any digital gear or anything like that.
It's a good thing those guys rock because
they
the
were
energy is awesome.
They were super tight and just very into it. Because a lot of times you'll present the idea of a direct to disc and artists don't really understand. And then when they realize that it's kind of high stakes because you can't overdub things, you can't go back, there's a little bit, oh no, what have I done? But
there's also a hurry up and wait factor.
Yeah.
So it's like you got to be amped up and ready to go, but wait your turn until it's like, now, go.
Now, exactly. And but they were like 100% into it and just super tight and rocked it and super easy to work with. It was a lot of fun.
So my version of that would be a couple of things. One, the first time I did this was a record for my band in St. Louis, and we decided to do a live to DAT record, and I just set up all the mics in a home studio. So my buddy Megan was living in this great house with, big wooden stairs going up and just like that kind of great space of an old house.
Yeah.
And we'd set up mics everywhere, and then it'd all go into my little Mackie mixer. But we'd balance some levels, we'd do a little compression on bass, maybe on some vocals. We barely knew what a compressor was back then.
Yeah.
And then that goes straight to the DAT. And then if I wanted to listen to it later, we'd press burn. We would record a cassette from the DAT and then go listen to that in the car. But I remember immediately being struck by the clarity of the sound when we did that. And I was like, wow, that's like, what a sound. It's like so clear and pristine. And you hear high frequencies and transients and details coming through that don't need like this boost of EQ to bring it out. And so then years later, when I went and did the Bonnaroo studio, we did the same thing where it's like we had all these mics out on the floor and then they all came into a console, and then I would mix on the console and headphones, and then that would get summed down to 2-track and go back to our mastering engineer. But in that case, he could just be in record the whole time. So all I'd have to say is, whenever you're ready, go ahead and start the song. What's the name of this one? All right. And then they just start playing.
Yeah.
And I mix it while they're playing. So we had a lot less pressure on us. Like I could change the levels of the mix. I could be too hot for one band and chill for the next because he could just, do the mastering afterwards.
Right.
But again, it's like there's a quality to the sound when it's all analog and it never goes to digital, never goes to the computer. That's so cool to hear. And do you feel like you were hearing that coming out of your mastering speakers too? And were you mastering on speakers for that or on headphones? Or?
I was mastering on speakers for that, yeah. And then when I also had people in the room with me, so I was, listening, they were listening for
They were
the
loud and distracting and annoying. And having a good time.
Yeah, it was a party. But yeah, like I kind of keep a static master too. Like I try not to change anything while they're playing. I try to keep it pretty consistent. Just because, Chris has his levels locked in upstairs, so I don't want to change too much because I don't want the consumer to listen and, be like, oh, why is this quieter? All that kind of stuff. So I keep it at one level consistently. But yeah, so I'm doing everything live on my end too. And so you just really have to be, all of us, like me, Chris, the band, all just locked in and just very focused for like 16 to 18 minutes.
Yeah. And that's per side.
Per
right?
side,
Per
yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. And then you get to the end of the cutting of both sides. And then, so for the test, you brought the lacquer up so the band could hear it. But in this case, everybody heard it while it was going down. So then it goes off to get pressed.
Yeah. So that's another big thing about lacquer cutting. And this is for any lacquer cut, whether it's, a direct to disc or just a regular session. Once a master lacquer is cut, we can't listen down to that lacquer. Mainly because the playbacks, the stylus on a turntable, if you play it back, because lacquer material is so malleable, it's very fragile and delicate. If you were to play those grooves back, you can impact the fidelity of the audio, specifically higher frequencies, because those are more, for lack of a better word, dainty than
right.
lower
So
frequencies.
When you're making a record, that lacquer is actually your master that's going to go be, I forgot, there's so many stages to vinyl.
Electroplated.
Yeah, electroplated,
yep.
and then pressed into a mother or a father or something.
Yeah.
Right?
So the lacquer, essentially a lacquer disc is flat aluminum disc with a thin layer of lacquer on it, which is essentially nail polish remover.
Right.
And that is the master, and then that's what's made into the metal parts, the mother, the stamper, all that stuff. And then that's what the metalwork is, what's sent to pressing plants to make the thousands and thousands of copies.
Right. And even those can only make so many copies before they're worn out and you need a new one, right?
Yeah. So one stamper can make up to 1,000 copies, but then you can keep pulling stampers off of mothers. Stampers are the inverse of the master lacquer.
Finished record.
Yeah. Because you literally put those stampers into the press, and then that plastic puck squishes it in.
Squishes the vinyl.
So that's why they're literally called stampers. But yeah, so one stamper can make about 1,000 records, and then you can keep pulling stampers off of mothers. But, in time, the mothers also get worn out. So it's good to also have a father, which is the same as a stamper. You're really just changing like negative and positive grooves.
Right.
But yeah, so we, once we cut a master lacquer, we can't listen back. We can't listen back to it. We just we do a look at the grooves. We can kind of tell if it's going to be playable based on how the grooves look. If there's any grooves that are too narrow or if they're touching, maybe there's a defect on the lacquer. We can kind of see that in the microscope on the lathe. And then we just have to trust that it's going to be good. But we do test cuts, and that's why, we will do a test run, one or two beforehand, to hear how it's going to sound.
Right, because in the test run you can play the lacquer because you don't need to make a record out of it. You're just listening back to see if you got the mix right or whatever.
Yeah, and we're using scrap lacquer too. We're not using a lacquer that's going to go into production. We're just using a lacquer that we might have messed up on a previous project, or it wasn't set, like the lacquer wasn't set properly, so it's not good for production, but we can still use it for tests, that kind of stuff. So we always do that to make sure everything is translating well onto vinyl.
Right.
But once a full side is cut, we can't listen to it, and it's usually it's not heard until test pressings are made.
Wow. So it's like another level of stress on that quality control. At least with the digital, you can put on headphones and listen through it before it gets sent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let me back up to that digital and the quality control thing.
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I wonder, like, every time you make a move with a digital file. So let's say you listen to the mix in Pro Tools and you're like, that sounds great. And then you bounce it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of trust that the bounce did the thing you thought it was going to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you listen to that and you're like, that sounds great. And then you send it to somebody. Again, it feels like sometimes like there's a lot of trust that send just sent the thing you're going to do.
Yep.
So are there some steps with digital files that we might just that you might want to like make us aware of? Like every time you do this, there's a chance something could change in what you thought you had?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that I am always kind of, I look out for is I always make sure that whatever markers I'm putting down for like my track start and my track end, I always make sure they're in the exact correct spot. Like one's not cutting something else off, like offsets aren't in so that, it can't cut the project off or add extra space. That's kind of like the biggest thing that I check for, and that I think seems to, if anyone's going to have an error when they export like a master, it's going to be
it's like the head or the tail.
Yeah, like the head or the tail. Like, are my markers in the right spot?
Right.
Or
that's something that I had to wrap my brain around, is that I was thinking about mastering sessions and how you drop these, beginning and end of song markers, but sometimes two songs would cross over each other a little on a CD, but then you could place the beginning marker for the next song wherever you wanted it.
Yeah.
And with digital files, what I've learned is if you want a certain space between two songs, all you're really doing is adding that amount of space onto the end of the song, the first song A going into song B, right?
Yep. Yeah. So whatever space you have between each track, it's primarily going to be on the track before it.
Right.
Because when you start a song, you don't want to sit for a second or two and then the song starts. It's better practice to have that dead air, I guess, towards the end of the previous track.
Do you feel like all the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mixing process I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick, and I'll save a seat for you at the front row table at the Grammys. So when you're setting the timing, like, you get to the end of a song and you're mentally like tapping your foot still, and you're like, and then you start the next song on a downbeat or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of things you've figured out that you instinctively do for spacing on songs, but I think I've noticed that about myself sometimes.
Yeah, I take a breath, like I'll let a song fade out, and then I'll be like, and then like where my breath ends is where I want that next track to start. It works like 90% of the time, 80% of the time, but that's what I find myself doing, is like I'll do a breath and then I listen to it to make sure it sounds like what I thought it would sound like.
Spacing between songs is a funny thing, because on the one hand, you've got, it's all about perspective, right? So it's like when you're zoomed in and you're doing the spacing, kind of all you're really hearing is the tail end of something. And then you're thinking about like, well, where should the next one begin? You know, and you might have an idea.
Yeah.
But when you actually listen to a record, you know, you could be like 10 minutes into listening and have a totally different feeling about whether you're ready for the next song or not, right?
Yeah. I mean, it all changes. I mean, like, it's also funny too, because I also, in my intake form that I'll send clients, I ask them, you know, do you have any specific spacing notes for me to have? Because sometimes people want, you know, one track to go directly into another, or they want extra space in between one. If they don't tell me that and I go to sequence and space everything, I might interpret it differently. So that's also something that's important to know and to get a grasp on, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's all different perspective. I tend to find that like I like a little bit more breath between, you know, maybe a slower song and then an up-tempo song. And then if there's, you know, a couple songs in succession that are pretty up-tempo, I like them to start pretty quickly after one another. Kind of like a concert. I mean, a lot of artists will like start their concert and it's usually, you know, upbeat songs, and they'll just go into like 2 or 3 of them, and then they do, you know, their intro and they talk a little bit, and then they go into maybe slower songs. So that's kind of how I interpret an album if that's how they've sequenced it in terms of their music.
If mixing a record means that we're in a state of looking for something to change with the mix and always thinking we can make the next mix better.
Yeah.
And having to let go of it. Is mastering like that? Do you ever do you also have to sort of let go of the master, and even though you're always going to hear something you could have done different? All
the time. I mean, especially if it's a mix I'm struggling to like find a balance with. I can go in circles, but if it's kind of like a blessing and a curse that it's normally you're working from a stereo file, because there's only so much you can do with a stereo file, as opposed to when you're mixing, you've got all the components that you can manipulate. I mean, it's different if you're stem mastering, but I don't typically do any stem mastering. But yeah, when you're working from a stereo file, there's only so much you can do with it. So if you're not getting somewhere within like X amount of time, you're probably not going to get anywhere better with it with more time.
Right,
so
you might just get somewhere slightly different.
Yeah. So I'm a perfectionist and type A. So I'm always like going back and forth, and I'm very indecisive, and I just kind of have to give myself a limit. And like, if this is what it is, and I'll send it to the client, and if they like it, we'll keep going. If they don't, they'll tell me, and you know, then I have some kind of direction.
Yeah. You should have seen me at the music store trying out Telecasters.
Oh no.
Last weekend. It's just like, I finally had to have 3 of them right next to me. I just plug it in, play it, unplug it, plug the other one and play it, back and forth, back and forth. If they didn't close, I don't think I would have left.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll like, when I start finding myself going down a rabbit hole, I'll just stop and I'll get up and I'll go get a coffee, or I'll go outside, or I'll look at my phone, like just a break to get some perspective, because I don't have any anymore. And then when I listen to it again, usually once I go back to it and I listen to it, I can find what I was having an issue with and get it to where I want to. But
do you often have sessions that are going on in the studio at the same time as you're mastering?
Yeah, oftentimes, but usually, I mean, the live room is on the other side of the downstairs. So if my door's shut, I don't really hear any of that.
You guys aren't competing for space. Yeah.
Unless there's like a guitar amp in one of those back rooms.
Right.
And in that case, I'll do lacquer cutting because it's less intrusive.
Right. You can kind of know what's coming, know what's being worked on, and coordinate. One of the records in your playlist, and Rockstars, we have Bobbi's playlist in the show notes. So please scroll down and just go listen to these awesome sounding records that she's done. But one of them is Willie Nelson, and there's a track in there, My Way.
Yeah.
Beautiful vocal sound, and some great harmonica playing too.
Yeah.
That one too. And I guess one of the things I thought about was when you're mastering, well, first of all, if you want to tell the story of that particular one, You've also worked with other artists in there are like Reba McEntire, Tammy Wynette, Kenny Chesney. And I was thinking like, here are these big, well-known voices. Talk about let's just call it pressure. Talk about the pressure of working with a well-known voice. And do you feel sometimes like you have to be so careful with recognizable voices like this that you don't change their voice somehow?
Yeah. So with those albums, I was an assistant at Georgetown at the time. So I was mainly assisting Andrew on those. So they kind of already had the ship steered. They knew he's worked with their producers, those artists before. So he kind of knew the direction they wanted to take it in. And for me, it was really just, knowing when I went in to do any, noise removal or, run a recall or anything like that. I knew to keep certain components in, like, I knew the Willie Nelson record, they like to keep it more natural instead of taking out every click and pop.
Right.
And
you can hear on his voice, you can hear that, it sort of opens up to let the phrase out, and then it might be muted in between in a way that has to be, feathered in and out just right and stuff like that. And I'm guessing those were all done. I don't know if those were like Steve Shady records, but like, with analog and a lot of cool analog gear going on.
Yeah, I unless I have it in front of me, I'm not. I know Buddy Cannon was the producer on all those.
Yeah.
And I'm regrettably blanking on who mixed it, but yeah, it was definitely just that kind of raw, natural sounding sound that they wanted. And that, they were familiar with and they knew how to work within. And then coming in as an assistant, I just needed to pick up on all that and be aware of it and just make sure that I, wasn't, taking anything away from it when I did any noise.
So what does that even mean? What are the opportunities to to correctly take something out of it or accidentally take something out of it in mastering?
So a big thing is probably doing any, noise correction or noise removal, and
using isotope RX,
using isotope RX, or there's another one that we used all the time, cedar retouch.
Cedar, right?
And I mean, you can get pretty heavy-handed if you want on either one of those, RX or cedar.
And didn't you say the other app was Sequoia or something like that?
That was the DAW.
Right, so they're all named after trees.
Kind of, yeah, a little bit. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, so it was like, you can get pretty heavy-handed, and so sometimes I'd get carried away with removing all the mouth noises, and if there's like a little thump in the electric guitar, I take that out. But then you go back and listen, and you can actually hear it. By taking that out, you're actually adding an artifact in. And so I had to be really careful about, which things I took out. Does it make it sound better? Does it make it sound cleaner? Does it add in an artifact? That kind of thing. And, being able to work on, really hone that skill with projects like that, with Willie Nelson and Reba and Kenny Chesney, that was super helpful.
Yeah. Let's talk about RX. Do you spend a lot of time? Are you an RX ninja?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in RX because we also do audio restoration at 79. So I'm often using the spatial retouch and all that stuff. So
so spatial retouch means you can kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah. So if I have if there's, a click or something, I can, highlight it, remove it, and then it basically just takes the information on either side and blends it together. So there's no audio dropout or blip or anything like that.
Yeah, it's so cool. Do you have any tips for us about how to just navigate and get around, move around in RX? Because sometimes I might find myself, and I've asked other guests this same question, like Harold LaRue. I was kind of asking him about that. But it's like, I might know how to zip around in Pro Tools, but then sometimes I go over to RX and I love using it, but I'm like, well, how do I move from here to there again? So do you have any stuff you want to say about that? And if you don't, that's fine too.
No, I think the main thing I get asked especially as a mastering engineer, is when I open RX, like, and I'm listening and I can hear a click, but then people can hear it, but then they're like, how do you know to find it? Like, how do you know that that line right there is that click? And it's like every click is also in a different frequency range, and you can see the frequencies on the sides of the graph.
Yeah.
So I know, okay, this was a higher pitch click, so it's not going to be down there, and the lower frequency is going to be higher up. So just kind of using everything at your disposal in that graph to pinpoint what it is you're hearing and how to take it out is probably the biggest thing, instead of just, going in blind and, okay, I heard this, now I'm just going to kind of search and, erase things that I think might be it.
Right. Right.
Just,
you don't be guessing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when people come into the studio and work with me and it's new, sometimes they think it's like magic that I can just tell exactly which blob on the Pro Tools screen is that vocal phrase or whatever.
Yeah.
But you just learn it. You just get used to it.
Experience,
I can look at it. I can find all the S's and breaths.
Yeah.
Without even having to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, that's same with doing noise removal for mastering. It's like I can hear it. Like I don't even have to hear it. I can see it, and then when I play it, I know that that's a click I got to take out. Or same with vinyl. If I have a WAV file that's continuous for one side, so it has all the tracks in that one file, I can just look at the waveforms and tell, like, I see the cue sheet. Okay, there's 5 songs on here. I can look at the waveforms and just know that those 5 songs, this is where each song starts and stops.
Yeah, exactly. Another one, like sometimes people, there's no markers in a Pro Tools session. It's like, you don't need any markers. You can tell, you just look at the vocals. You can tell which is the chorus. See that big hole right there where there's nothing on the vocal track? That's the bridge. That's the solo. You don't have to look for it.
It's just experience and learning.
Awesome. Well, so let me go to this question. I'll go to a couple of questions here. What do you want to say for the rock stars about a tip or a resource for the business side of doing any of this stuff? If we want to make records for more than just a hobby, do you have anything you want to say about that? Anything that comes to mind?
That's a good question. For me, I really benefited from saying yes to pretty much anything that came my way work-wise. And, setting a budget or setting a rate for myself, even if it's a low rate, just having something that discerns the value of my time. But then if, someone comes in and they're saying, oh, I can't work with that, but can you work within this budget, and still taking that, because eventually you can negotiate all that, but then over time you can increase your rate and you'll get clients that can pay that rate. But also it's always good to just, be flexible and be able to work within other people's budgets if they're a smaller artist.
Yeah.
But I really benefited from doing that earlier on.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. Do you think there's a difference between that saying yes and finding yourself in a a problematic situation on the production recording side of a record versus on the mastering side? And are you making a distinction when you're remembering that, or were you saying yes to music projects even in the recording production side?
I was saying yes to everything. Yeah,
all
like I was
opportunities
even
and
doing
stuff,
like audio post and sound design and all that stuff
Yeah.
and
podcast editing.
Podcast editing. I was literally I was doing all of it and just to work, just to, get my chops up and then eventually you find your footing and you find what you gravitate towards more and what you like more.
Yeah.
So in my case it was mastering, but it's different for everyone.
What about that notion of fake it till you make it? Did you find it helpful to decide, I want to do this thing, I like doing this thing, I'm just going to tell everybody that's what I do?
I'm not good at faking. I have imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not good at faking it till you make it. Like, fake it till you make it. I'm not good at it. I definitely am the opposite of that. I didn't really tell myself I was a mastering engineer until, I don't know, maybe a few years ago, like when I started having my own clients. Like, even as an assistant, I thought of myself as an assistant, not so much a mastering engineer. But
and now you're running a spaceship. A spaceship from the 1970s.
A spaceship from the 1970s with me and one other person. But still, like, we're running it. And so, it's definitely, I'm not a fake it till you make it person. But I am a get thrown into the fire and figure it out. Which has been the majority of my work experiences is I just get asked to do something and I might not know what it is, but the best way I'm going to learn is just by doing it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay. How about a tip for the organizational side of what we do? What do you want to say to the rock stars about how you keep your shit together in the studio?
Organization's your friend. It's so easy to get your files mixed up, especially in mastering. You'll get you can get mixes from multiple engineers, multiple producers, just making sure you have the most up-to-date mixes. Organization-wise, I like to use Trello. I know a lot of people use Trello. Because I can organize every project through a card. But then I also just have, I have a planner and in my Apple Calendar, I'm very, I make sure that they match and everything is in my Apple Calendar, everything's in my written calendar, all my projects are up to date in my Trello cards. I just take that extra minute or extra few minutes every morning to just make sure everything is organized. Because as soon as for me personally, as soon as I get unorganized, I just get very flustered.
Yeah.
And I can't really focus because my brain is in a million different directions. So,
yeah. So Rockstar's Trello is a cool online app. Mm-hmm. Think of picture columns with little index cards in it.
Essentially,
You can write whatever you want on the index card and then you can move it from one column to the next. So it could be in production, finished, ready for something else or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, I have it as invoiced, and then I've got little labels that say invoice paid, and then I have, waiting feedback if I sent a reference out, and then once it's approved, I have approved, need production masters. So you can tailor it to really whatever you need. But then on the lacquer cutting and electroplaying side, we use Monday.
I've heard of that one too, yeah.
Yeah, and that one's really great because it's another thing where it's item cards, but instead of separate cards, it's columns essentially. And every project has its own row and column. And it's really easy for mastering and for the playing department to work together because it's
very team focused too.
Yeah. So if you have, team oriented things, Monday is great. Trello, you can also be team oriented, but I find I like working better with it, individually.
Yeah, I use one called Asana, which is
I feel like I've heard that.
Similar to, it'll do the Trello view, or you can do it like a list of things.
Yeah.
I'll have all the podcasts in there and stuff. And yeah, for what it's worth, Rockstars, a lot of these things you can get away with the free account for quite a long time before you even need to upgrade to anything paid.
Yeah.
So if you're just curious, you can easily check these things out.
Yeah, I think Trello, I don't think we pay. I think we use a free version of Trello, but we pay for some of the extensions, like some of the more fancier ways of, if you want to automate anything or something like that. Monday is a paid program. But it's helped our organization so much on the lacquer cutting side.
And the beauty of these apps that are part of your business that you might pay for is it's usually by the time you reach the level where you need to pay for it, you're already making money using it. So you're like, it's no brainer.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then let me go to this question. This one is hypothetical, and we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Okay.
You got to go back and find young Bobbi.
Okay.
And say, listen, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know or be thinking about to be a rock star of the studio yourself. You're going to go back. You get to go back and give yourself some advice.
Like a little pep talk.
Yeah. What would you like? Yeah. A little pep talk.
I would probably, so when I started college, when I was 17, and I was the only girl in my program, and I was super nervous about it. So I had my mom, that classic back to school shopping experience. Her and I went shopping for clothes, and I wanted just like the blandest clothes you can get, like neutrals, bland, like nothing flashy, because I didn't want to stand out as like the only girl in my class.
Right.
And I also wanted to prove that I was as smart or smarter than the guys in my class. But then the more comfortable I got, the more I realized that was not the way to do things, I ended up, we're still good friends. I still talk to a lot of my old classmates today, and, they were very encouraging and supportive, and you need that community. So I'd probably tell myself to, not write that off and to, be a part of it, not try to be against it.
Yeah.
And then, again, something that Ebony told, Ebony talked about a lot once was, don't hide your womanhood. It's part of the experience you bring to a studio, whether you're a mastering engineer, songwriter, all that. And that's what I did when I was trying to buy like the, very boring clothes. Even my mom was like, you sure you don't want this? I'm like, no.
Why such boring clothes?
Yeah. She was like, why don't you get something, like you're going to college? I'm like, no, I don't want, I don't want to be noticed. But yeah, it's just embracing who you are I know it sounds corny, but it's important because that's,
well, I think of another version of that too, is this idea where people say it's sort of the build it and they will come thinking too, which is like, and it's all tied into the imposter syndrome sometimes, I think, but it's this idea of like, if I just make a great record, it'll let it speak for itself. It's like, it's this idea that you don't have to step into the light and say, hey, look at me. And you kind of do,
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily step into the light, but you don't also have to hide who you are as a person. And because even if you're a recording engineer or mastering engineer, you're still bringing a creative aspect, and that's a very personal and vulnerable thing. So to hide that, I think it's just not beneficial. And I'm still learning to do that. There's a lot of times I get, closed off or insecure, but I try to, just embrace who I am and what I can offer to a project. And, I think that's really important. I would probably tell 18-year-old Bobbi to, buy nicer clothes.
Buy cooler clothes.
Buy cooler clothes. I still wear pretty plain clothes, but it was like,
well, my daughter she styled me for Christmas.
Oh, she did?
This year. Yeah, she got me some cool Adidas sneakers.
Oh, see, I'm a big sneaker person. I love sneakers. I know I have boots.
You're not wearing sneakers today.
Not today, but
neither am I. So.
Yeah, and today was boots, but I like a sneaker.
Bobbi, awesome to have you here on the show with us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Will you please let the rock stars know where they can find you, and if they're like, you know what, I want to come do a live to disc record or cut vinyl or just get my record mastered,
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds awesome. Where should they go?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram. I'm on there more often than I should be. Just my name, Bobbi Giel. Same with Twitter and X, or Twitter X. I don't know what people are calling it. The Bird app.
Yeah.
Same thing, Bobbi Giel. And then the 79 Welcome to 1979 studio page has all of our email addresses and contact information if you want to get a project mastered.
Awesome. And then Rockstar's a reminder that Welcome to 1979 has a great annual event called the Recording Summit.
Mm-hmm.
Usually happens in November. This will come out, you'll be hearing this in the summer, but so you'll still have time to get a ticket and go to that thing. And my guess is at that event, you'll be showing off, you'll be doing like mastering room studio tours and stuff like that too.
Yeah, right? We always do. Yeah, it's always the second weekend in November. And we always do a lacquer cutting and electroplating.
And usually
panel.
a live to disc.
Yeah, live to disc party
too, right?
is on Friday. And then we also do a listening party on Saturday. And we usually get, one of those classic albums, and we track down the engineer to listen through it with us, and then we ask questions of what the process was and any little anecdotes from that experience.
Good anecdotes too, because it's intentionally not recorded and archived.
Yep.
So that people will really open up like a real conversation in a control room.
Yeah, that's a big thing about the summit too, is that photos are encouraged and everything, but we don't, especially during a listening party. We ask that people don't do any video recordings or anything, just so it's an internal experience and people can be open about their experiences. And
right, you're hoping for an unfiltered perspective.
Yep.
Well, awesome. Well, Bobbi, thank you so much. Rockstars, thanks for listening. And Bobbi, I look forward to coming over and seeing your studio sometime.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.